Welcome to Concussion Stories, a Lifeyana podcast series filled with hope. I'm here to let you know that you are not alone in your concussion recovery. I'm Melanie, and I spent more than 6 years experimenting, training, and learning in order to heal myself from a very bad case of post-concussion syndrome. And today, I feel better than ever before. In Concussion Stories, we dig deep while discussing hopeful stories of recovery as well as the hard stuff in the messy middle. If you're struggling to focus, be sure to take breaks. Down in the description of each episode, you can find a table of contents in case you want to skip ahead. Let's dive right in. Today, I speak with Lindsay Wilson, Professor of Neuropsychology at the University of Stirling in the UK. Just like Emeritus Professor Andrew Maas, with whom I spoke in a previous Concussion Stories episode, Lindsay is part of CENTER-TBI. This is a large European research project that aims to improve the care for patients with traumatic brain injury. Lindsay's research is focused on traumatic brain injury in combination with quality of life, coping strategies, as well as PTSD. He has also dedicated a lot of time to unmistakably point out that the medical field needs better methods of diagnosing brain injury. Almost immediately after contacting him, even though he was on leave, Lindsay answered that he'd be happy to be here with us. I'm at least as happy that he is here today, so let's start this conversation. Welcome, Lindsay, to our Concussion Stories episode today, and thank you for being here with me.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I wanted to say that I found it quite special that you immediately told me after getting into touch with me that I could leave the formalities aside and call you just Lindsay. And this tells me a bit about who you are already. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself. So what are things you like to do and who are people you like to spend your time with?
Well, Melanie, I live in Scotland, and one of the great things about living here is enjoying the outdoor world. And so we go hill walking and sailing, and I like to do that with my wife and my children and friends. So that's how I most enjoy my spare time.
It sounds wonderful. As I already told you, I live in Amsterdam, and it's quite a different life.
Yeah, there's not many hills in Holland.
No, that's true. And I would say also not as much wild nature as you have, I get it.
Yes, I'm sure that's true.
So can you explain to our listeners, what does a professor of neuropsychology do? And also, what does it mean to be a neuropsychologist to you personally?
Well, neuropsychology is a combination of neuro and psychology. So it's really about the relationship between psychology and the brain. And for me, the brain is absolutely fascinating. I think it's one of the most complex things in the universe, in fact, and one of the most difficult things to understand. But we can see over the past 50 years, there's been huge progress in understanding the brain, and there will continue to be progress. So for me, it's studying the brain is part of a journey with many other people. It's wonderful that you see it this way, and I think this imagination is what you would need to really be good at what you do in this field. Yeah, I think one has to be inclusive and to think creatively about problems and the way that problems in daily life, for example, relate to problems in the brain itself. And that's why I got interested in traumatic brain injury, because it gives an opportunity not just to study the brain as an academic subject, but something that's of relevance to the individual. As a neuropsychologist, I've seen many, many people who've suffered traumatic brain injury. And one of the things that's very clear is how diverse the consequences are for people. That people can have very what appear to be minor injuries and suffer considerable consequences, and others have severe injuries, but can make surprisingly good recoveries. So it's fascinating to see this.
Yes, yes, I can fully imagine. As a scientist, also looking at this from your perspective, that it is really fascinating. And of course, for a lot of our listeners, it's really a very harsh reality. And I was wondering, what are the things as a neuropsychologist you are looking into? So, what are the things that are coming after a concussion, really, that people can maybe recognize?
Um, well, there's a range of different things that come under neuropsychology, and they include cognitive changes. One of the key pieces of expertise for neuropsychology is in studying cognitive performance and different aspects of it. But there's other things that are important as well, such as the emotional consequences of injury, depression, anxiety. As well as the overall effect it has on the person, how they function in daily life, and also their overall feeling of adjustment in daily life. So all of these things are part of what I've been studying as a neuropsychologist.
Hmm. And how rare or how normal would you say these kind of effects that you just described are for people who have sustained a concussion and who need a longer time to heal?
Um, well, they're surprisingly common. Not major cognitive problems certainly, but minor ones, and also lots of different kinds of symptoms that people report after mild TBI or concussion. And one of the surprising things is how long these can last, and also how what a sizable proportion of people this amounts to in terms of the effects of TBI.
Yes, yes. This is Andrew Maas has discussed a lot of these numbers indeed with us in the last episode, and he has really well put a finger on the size of this. Well, the way he said it, mild TBI is not so mild, and that is really, I think, hitting the nail on its head. Um, I I was wondering if you say a minor cognitive, what did you say? Minor cognitive
Impairment, yeah.
impairment. Yes. What would you describe? What are things in this category?
Um, well, for example, people might find that they're slower than they were before, or their memory is not quite as good, and it might not amount to what would be considered a classic impairment in memory, or clear slowing if you compare it with the normal population. But for the person, there's definitely a difference there. They've lost something after the brain injury. So there can be subtle changes in cognition which can be picked up with testing.
Yes, yes, and sometimes also not. That's something that Andrew and I also talked about. I can, for example, in my case, when I first went to neurologist and they did all the tests, and I also got a CT scan, they told me that nothing was wrong with me. That were the words, and I said, but I feel that something is really wrong with me. So these are the subtle changes that you also talked about. And then he said again, no, nothing is wrong with you. This is good news. And I understood that there could have been worse news. Yes. So I was happy that there weren't any worse things going on with me, but still, there was no good news for me because now I was not only feeling that something was wrong, but also the doctor couldn't see it. And that's something that a lot of us struggle with. And that's something also that Andrew also talked about a lot the last time, that CT scans often fail to see mild brain injury.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the most important kinds of brain injury is diffuse axonal injury. That's microscopic injury to the neurons in the brain, and CT just doesn't see that at all. It can sometimes, in severe cases, it'll pick up indications of such injuries, but not in mild cases. So there's a lot of limitations to current imaging and other ways of detecting the effects of a head injury.
Yes, I believe you have also written that there is a need to go beyond the idea that only a single outcome is needed to assess individuals after a TBI, right? Can you?
Yeah,
Can you?
Yeah, certainly. And that's really to do with what I was saying a bit earlier about the need to look at different aspects of the consequences, including emotional factors and and also cognitive factors. Traditionally, what people have concentrated on after brain injury has been people's functional outcome, that is, return to work, return to independent living, these aspects. But there's a lot more to it than that, and certainly in mild TBI, it's clear there's a lot of different consequences.
Yes, yes, because you have already touched upon the subjects of anxiety and depression, both of which I have experienced myself as well, and I've fully recovered from. So it's very important for people, I think, to know that that's possible. But these are things that no doctor ever told me about when I had my concussion. And I also had, I think I was very late in diagnosing myself with them. So saying that something was wrong and that I needed help. But also because I never knew before what was hitting me. I never knew all of these things that were washing over me that I never expected. Do you recognize this from your research as well?
This is really very common, Melanie. This is a common experience, and particularly in the early stages, it's exceedingly common to have some symptoms or problems after a mild TBI, and for most people these will go away, but it takes quite a long time, and we know that it can take up to 3 months, for example, for symptoms to subside. For people with mild TBI, I mean, there's a group also that suffer for longer, but for many people it will be weeks or months that they have symptoms, and people don't expect that. They don't expect to have symptoms for such a long time, and it's quite disturbing to have these symptoms, and it means it can affect your work and so forth, and you're not expecting it, and what it produces anxiety and concern about yourself. That if you expected it, you would be better prepared, and it might be less of a problem.
Yes, exactly, and it's also not exactly one of the subjects that we were taught in school, how to deal with adversity.
Well, exactly, yes.
Yeah, and then when you're in the middle of this process, when your brain is broken and you need it the most, but you cannot really use it, you need to learn all of these, well, the way you say it, coping strategies, in order to be able to manage your recovery.
Yes, exactly.
Let alone find the way how to recover. So I know that a lot of people indeed recover within the first 3 months, but also people that are listening now have had their concussion for longer than that time, and it's been really hard for them to adapt, to find a way. Especially when the medical field doesn't always know what to do with them.
I think that's right. It does only just becoming recognised that people do continue to have problems after mild TBI, and it really can be quite a high proportion of people perhaps a third or a half at 6 months, and continuing 12 months and beyond. And even very long-term follow-up, we know that people can continue to have problems after an apparently mild TBI.
Yes, yes. And coming back to the emotional consequences that you just described. So, for example, at first, I think there are a bit milder consequences, like you feel that you can't keep up with work. It's harder to fulfill expectations that others have of you, because you could do things before and now you can't. You feel like you're failing loved ones, for example, because you can't do everything again anymore. And then after a while, for example, if you can't go back to work, and if you can't do sports and can meet friends in restaurants, etc., isolation often creeps in. And from there, things like anxiety, panic attacks, depression are far, people have a bigger risk to experience them than before, right? I feel it's like adding up, all piling up. Do you see the same?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what you're describing is quite a common experience that people, for example, they go back to work and they find that they can't do things as quickly as they could before. They might find that things are difficult. Colleagues might get a bit frustrated by them because they're slower, and the person themselves begins to obviously feels badly about it and starts to worry about it, and in the worst case, they may lose their job because they're not performing as they should be. So you get a whole cycle of problems that can be set up by what at first it seems like a fairly quite a small or a minor symptom, but it can have great repercussions for the individual and their performance in daily life.
Yes, exactly. And how do you feel? Because as I listen to you, I feel that this is something that you would like to see changed, right? The awareness, at least, of this, of these effects, would become bigger. How do you see this? How can we do this?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we can do. One is to make sure that the individuals who have a TBI or mild TBI know that there are typical consequences, and they're likely to last at least several weeks, and so they're prepared for that. But undoubtedly, it's also important that that employers know, or other people know, that their family know that there are likely to be changes for a while. And then another thing that we should be doing clearly, and that's not done systematically, is just following up people with mild TBI to find out if they still have problems 3 months, 6 months down the line, because these are people that should be given specific help and more attention from the system.
Yes, that's a very good idea. And do you feel that should be done by a GP, or who should fulfill that role?
Well, it will depend on the care system. I think it would be good if the people that are involved in acute care did do some follow up. It can be very light touch. It could just be a matter of contacting people with a few short questionnaires that would identify whether they were still having issues later on. And then if they are, they could be advised to seek appropriate help. And what that help might be would depend on the care system in the place.
I see.
But a lot of people are just left to work it out for themselves, which I think is not the best solution.
No, yeah, I think it's the worst solution, especially when it comes to psychological problems. But of course, it's coming from we're developing the whole system, and all the knowledge about concussions is developing, and that's something to be really happy about. It's just, I'm sorry, but it sucks for the people who still have it right now. But that's what we're doing this for, and that's what I'm working for, to to increase awareness, and also to help people hands-on right now if they're struggling. And also this conversation with you will really help, because I know that people feel lost in their feelings, especially in all of the experiences that come with a concussion and the isolation. And I also know, I just came up with this question. I really want to ask it. I also know that people struggle with that people can, others, loved ones can't see their injury. So it's an invisible injury. And it's hard for them to really show all of their troubles and everything they're struggling with, because on the one hand, when they're spending time with loved ones, they want to spend it in a nice way, and they don't want to talk all about their troubles, because when the loved ones aren't there, they already have all the troubles all the time. And on the other hand, they don't know where to start. Is there something that you could say about this? Something you feel would help, maybe?
Well, traumatic brain injury has been caused a silent epidemic for that reason, because it consists of changes and disabilities that are not obvious to other people. So that's certainly a key issue.
Yes.
And part of this is people with traumatic brain injury understanding that they may need help, and they should seek help, and also involve the relatives and carers, so that they're informed about the kinds of changes that might have taken place.
Now I would love to hear from you. What do you take away from this episode? Is there something that you can apply to your life right away? Head on over to lifeyana.com and leave your comment now. And if you want to hear and read more concussion stories, actionable steps, and inspiration, be sure to subscribe to the Lifeyana email list while you're there, so that you never miss out on new materials we constantly make for you. If you want to support this podcast, head on over to patreon.com/concussion stories. Thank you for listening to this Concussion Stories episode by Lifeyana. May you be well, and may you be happy.